I'm here. Name is not here. Robbie Kirk.
I'm here.
Oh. That didn't sound like Robbie. Mitch Morber. Sharon Knowles.
Here.
Ira Nemeth. Ricky Reeves. Denise Rose. Nick Sloan. Edwin Smith.
Here.
Margaret McGraw.
Here.
Kenneth Webb.
Here.
Micah Wilson.
Here.
All right, so we have a quorum. All right, so it's been an extremely busy couple of months for disaster response and preparedness, and so we actually have a lot to talk about. In true Eric Epley fashion, I am going to skip around on the agenda because we have several presentations that are, I think, very important to look at and then have some discussion on this morning. If everybody will just, do y'all have the minutes? Y'all have the minutes. If everybody will just take some time during the meeting to look at the minutes. Page 16 is blank on purpose. Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any opposed? All in favor? Okay. All righty. I'm going to start with Sharon Knowles, and I understand also Maxie and Dee Dee from TDM were going to try and be here as well. Do you mind if I go ahead and let the other folks talk, and then we'll get to the steer? Okay, we have some guest speakers today. Brought to us by Rick Bays. Thank you, Rick, for organizing that. We have some guest speakers from DSHS to talk with us about BioWatch, the SNS, and the ChemPAC. And I'll let you guys go ahead and take it away. Are we ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay.
You guys ready? I'll just let you introduce yourself.
Trying to stand in front of the mic.
Yeah. Is it being recorded? Yeah.
Oh, the other one. So my name is Brian Mason. I'm the BioWatch Jurisdictional Coordinator for the state of Texas. I'm actually a contractor for DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and so I'm going to talk to you about BioWatch today. I'll try to keep it informal. This is what we call a non-FOU presentation. So it's not for official use only. If you were a jurisdiction that actually had a BioWatch network, we have different trainings for those type of folks. We have a management kind of awareness level training, and then we also have an operations level training for the guys that would be out in the field doing some work. So everything I'm going to talk about today is going to be very high level, probably the 30 to 35,000 foot view. I'm not going to give you a lot of specifics about the program. I'm just going to give you an overview on the program. If you feel that you need to be briefed in the program, please let me know. There's some paperwork you're going to have to sign and a few other things, and I can go into more detail about the program at that time. So first off, as a whole, BioWatch is not a secret. I went into Google last night, typed in BioWatch, I got 93,000 hits in 0.24 seconds. So as a whole, it is not a secret. If you actually enjoy surfing the web, Wikipedia is fairly accurate when it comes to BioWatch. It's probably 85 to 90% accurate. There's some good information there. What I like about Wikipedia is whenever they summarize something in a paragraph, they always give you the link to the congressional report or to the article from the newspaper where they got that information. So DHS does consider BioWatch for official use only. It doesn't have a secret or top secret classification. It's for official use only. It is sensitive to the national security mission. The sensitive information we try not to share with people that do not have a need to know are the specific collector locations, the organisms we're looking for, and our collection schedule. We always try to differentiate the difference between want to know versus need to know. So if just because somebody wants to know and just because they have a top secret clearance, it doesn't mean that they need to be briefed into the program. On a local level, your health departments, your OEMs, fire, police, a wide variety of local folks that have a need to know, we brief them into the program and they have to sign an NDA or non-disclosure agreement. So what is BioWatch? It was a system that was rolled out in 2003. It's a biosurveillance system. It is not meant to take the place of health departments. It is just another surveillance tool for health departments. It's designed to detect the intentional release of select organisms or aerosolized agents that we look for. We look for a handful of organisms. I generally like to tell people that we look for the Category A and Category B agents in the CDC world. We don't look for all of those, but that will give you an idea of the type of things we look for. It is federally managed and funded, so DHS gets money. They have here in Texas, They give a cooperative agreement to TCEQ, and then TCEQ has contracts with the local cities to go out and pick up the filters on a daily basis. It's in about 30-plus metro areas. My family lives in Kingsland, Texas, so it doesn't have a big population density out in Kingsland, out by Lake LBJ. We're not going to have a BioWatch network out in Kingsland, Texas. It's going to be our highly populated and densely packed areas. If you got on a list of the top 50 populated cities in the country, those are probably the ones we're going to be monitoring in. It's also used for special events, Super Bowl, political party conventions, presidential inauguration, and then the locals have an option to do local events. So the first events I listed up before, the Super Bowl, political party conventions, and the inauguration, those are either SEER 1 or NESI events, national significant special events. So if an event has that type of classification associated with it, there's federal funding that comes down to do additional BioWatch monitoring. If there's a local special event, for example, Austin has ACL. If they want to do additional monitoring for ACL, as a local committee, they can decide to do some additional monitoring, but that's on their own dime. They won't get federally reimbursed for that. The filters are picked up 7 days a week. They run 24/7, 365. The only time we generally don't have samples running is if a hurricane's going to blow into Houston. That's a safety risk for the guys to pick up the filters. And if you're a bad guy, do you really want to release your organism when Hurricane Ike's getting ready to roll into the area? The network was rolled out originally in 2003. When they rolled it out, they originally put it with TCEQ air quality stations. It was kind of an easy first step. They were secure, they had power. It was an easy way to put them out. The bad thing about the TCEQ stations are they're focused around industry, so it didn't really cover the population very well. So we came back through in 2005 and they did what was called an enhancement or optimization for your network. They looked at your overall population, they looked at specific targets, they got some local input, and they remodeled the area and added a bunch of collectors and moved some collectors around to get better coverage for your population. Does the network work? Texas, we kind of have a very unique or dubious honor. We've had the majority of the bars or BioWatch actionable results or detections on the network since 2003. There's been over 100 detections on the network. All of them have been endemic or naturally occurring. One of these organisms we look for in particular likes warm, moist environments, and Houston is a very warm and moist environment, so we tend to find it down there on a semi-regular basis. As the years have gone by, we've gotten more data. We've started to see certain weather patterns. We end up getting detections or bars following weather patterns. So in Texas, when it's abnormally cool and wet, generally a cold front has blown through our area. So the organism sits out there naturally. The cold front blows through with high winds. It stirs it all up. And over the next day or two after that event, everything starts to settle back out. And then we end up having bars or detections on the network. Once again, we know those are endemic. They're naturally occurring. They're at very, very low levels for an organism that we know is endemic to Texas. Another way we know that network works is out in the DC area. They spray for gypsy moths. They use an organism similar to anthrax. They use BTK, Bacillus thuringiensis. When they do the spraying, they actually add BTK to the analysis of the filters, and we see the organism for days to weeks after they do the spraying. One caveat with that is when they're doing the spraying outside, they're spraying kilograms of that stuff, hundreds of kilograms to kill the gypsy moth. So we do see it for days to weeks, and we've also noticed that humans do a very good job of tracking it indoors. So when they've done the spraying in the past, they've gone into some large indoor facilities, Reagan National Airport being one. They'll do sampling before, they do the spraying, they go back into Reagan National Airport, do some follow-up sampling, and we track it all in the place. Where the doors open and close, where people are walking, we tend to be very good vectors of moving the stuff around. Each city that has a BioWatch network has what's called a BAC, or a BioWatch Advisory Committee, and it's composed of several different people. From the local level, your health department, lab, OEM, fire, police, city and county officials, PIOs. On the state, we have TCEQ, DSHS. They actually provide their public health folks, EPIs, and vets as well. And then we have TDEM personnel associated with the back. And on a federal level, you have DHS, FBI, and EPA. They are basically kind of the unified command, or the people that get notified if there was a BAR or a BioWatch actionable result. They are responsible for everything to do with the network, for making sure it was installed properly, making sure that it runs all the time, getting filters picked up, taken to the lab, and processed for analysis. And then once again, if there is a BAR or a BioWatch actionable result, they are responsible for responding to that event. There it goes. Kind of a generic timeline. I don't want to put down specific times right now. If you need to be briefed in the program, I would definitely do that. The red line on the far left where it says notifications, that's to indicate that we have a BAR or a BioWatch actionable result. So whenever we have a detection on the network, the lab is going to do a series of things. They're going to contact CDC, their BRAT hotline for the lab, and they are going to do a one-on-one consult with the lab. The lab is going to share their data with CDC. CDC is going to look at it, and they kind of come to a agreement that, yes, this really is a BAR or a BioWatch actionable result. I tend to call that a CYA call. If you're a local back and you're about ready to let Dr. Peirce know in Houston that your whole entire city was slimed with anthrax, it would be nice to have some top cover from Atlanta that, yes, we really agree with the data that you're seeing, and we think this is a BAR. After the lab does their consult, they're going to start notifying the BAC, or the BioWatch Advisory Committee officials. The locals are going to notify everybody on that BAC, and then people in their chain of command will be notifying people up their chain of command. So, for example, down in the Houston area, if the Houston hazmat chief is notified that we've had a BAR, he's going to notify his command in that notification period. I do a series of notifications. I notify a lot of the state agencies, TCEQ, DSHS. I notify the SOC to let the SOC know what's going on. I notify EPA, and then I actually notify Los Alamos National Lab as well, because they can do some event reconstruction and some modeling for us at the same time. The different state agencies are going to notify their management. So we have about an hour for notifications, allow people to call each other and let them know what's going on. In that same time, during the notification period, certain disciplines have things they have to do. So epidemiologists are going to do surveillance reports. They're going to do some active surveillance, look at the hospitals, look at their over-the-counter sales and other surveillance tools they have. So when we go to that local tactical call, they're able to give a report on what's going on. At the same time, law enforcement, FBI, they're going to do intelligence gathering to where they can come to that local call and give us a report. Then we have that local, what we call back tactical call, or local jurisdictional call, and that's basically where we talk about what's going on, what are we going to do, and what type of support do we need from both the state and from the feds. That takes about an hour for that call to happen, and basically we are generating our initial IAP for that first operational period. After we get off that local call, we then get on a federal call where we basically regurgitate to the feds exactly what we decided on that local call. What's going on? What are we going to do as a local community, and what type of support we need from the feds? It may be a request for the SNS. It may be a request for additional support for modeling from Los Alamos National Lab. All those federal requests would then initially be notified to the feds on that call, with the understanding that people are still going to follow the proper chain of command. So just because we ask for the SNS on that federal call, there's still a series of steps and processes that have to occur, and Michael's going to go through that in just a second, through the state level to then go up to the feds for those resources to come. Kind of the big stuff over in the middle that's kind of hard to see, it just really talks about what the BACs are going to be doing throughout that evening. So there's going to be a whole bunch of activities they're going to do. They're going to notify their political leaders. Most likely, if something happens in Houston, Dr. Peirce is probably going to call the mayor of Houston and let her know it's a bad day to be in Houston. This is what's going on, and this is what we're going to do. At the same time, once again, our EPIs are going to step up their active human surveillance. Our vets are going to do animal surveillance. People may contact the hospitals. They may disseminate case definitions to the hospitals to let them know specifically what they should be looking for. Most of the organisms we look for have flu-like symptoms. So if you're a bad guy and you released it in February during the peak of our flu season and everybody's going to the ER with flu symptoms, an ER doc's probably going to say you have the flu, go home, when in reality it could be anthrax or another organism that's out there. So they're probably going to contact the hospitals, let them know what's going on. FBI is going to continue to do their resource intelligence gathering. You may get additional resources that come in through your requests. Once again, SNS and medical countermeasures that Michael's going to talk about. One of the big things we kind of struggle with on a local level is what do you tell the public and when do you tell them? Our network, I'll go through in just a second, it gives us one piece to the puzzle, but it doesn't mean that the world's necessarily coming to an end. So as a local community, what do you tell the public, when do you tell them, and how do you tell them? That's some of the stuff that we work, those are the issues we work on a local level. If there's an event, we are most likely going to stand up our EOCs. We're going to do an IAP. And then one of the big things that we've addressed here in Texas that not all states have is making sure that our initial folks that would go out and do additional sampling that night, that they get medical countermeasures or some type of pills down their throat to where they can go ahead and start doing their job. After all that stuff's kind of worked out in the middle of the night, sometime in the morning, probably 5-ish in the morning, the locals are going to start to implement their public protection safety strategies. So what would that be? It's going to be up to the locals. Are they going to close schools? Once you cancel schools or close schools, you've pretty much set off a chain that's going to close down your whole city. Or they may determine they're going to do nothing based on what we found on our initial round of sampling. And if we go out and do additional sampling, if we can't confirm or detect this stuff again, a local health authority may make the decision that this is not a threat to public health, and they may not implement any public protection safety strategies. Kind of the scope of BioWatch. Really, and people have different opinions on BioWatch. I kind of look at BioWatch as basically as a surveillance tool. Once it goes off, and once we decide that it's a threat to public health, BioWatch kind of goes to the background, and then we should start transitioning into our all hazards plans. How do we respond to normal large events? We are kind of a smoke alarm that's going to go off and let you know we've picked something up. But just because the smoke alarm goes off in our house, it doesn't mean that we have a huge fire in our house. It could be a small little electrical issue. It could be that I burned toast in the toaster. So it's just giving you a signal that there's something else you need to check on. For the preparedness activities, we help with planning. We do routine exercises. Most of our jurisdictions do an annual exercise. So BioWatch really leads you up to the notifications that a bar or a bar declaration, once again, a BioWatch actionable result has been detected. We do our notifications. The bar situational assessment is generally that local call, and that may last for the next 12 to 24 hours. But once the locals have made the determination that this is a threat to public health, BioWatch, as we know, kind of goes into the background. We're still going to get samples and give the local health authorities some more data, but everybody should be transitioning into their normal roles. You know, once again, our backs are 30 to 35 people. They're going to have their normal job they have to go and do if there's a serious emergency going on in your jurisdiction. Kind of the slide they always like for us to talk about. If you look on the bottom, it says detection time in days from 0 to 15, and then total ill is on the left. And you'll see kind of the exponential growth of the longer it takes for us to detect that there was an event, the larger number of people that are going to get sick. So the whole purpose of BioWatch is that we find out that there was a potential release on day 1 versus finding out on day 5 or 6 after an astute clinician picked up on all the signs and symptoms to get the proper tests done. Most likely, if we didn't have BioWatch, it would take someone like me, someone who's fairly healthy, who's getting beat pretty bad by whatever's going on, for an astute clinician to think to themselves, maybe this really isn't the flu, maybe it's something else that I need to have some additional tests done. So that's really the purpose of BioWatch, is we find out in day 1 versus finding out in day 5 or day 6. And that all goes back into incubation period. So for most of these organisms, once your incubation period's up and your body's starting to lose from being exposed to that organism, it's a lot harder to save you at that time. If we find out in day 1 and we have a 5-day incubation period, well, if we start getting pills down people's throat at day 1 or day 2 versus day 5 or day 6, that's just going to give us an opportunity to save more lives. Kind of a summary, Michael's going to go into the 4 Ds. He does it all the time, and I really like it. He talks about detect, decide, distribute, and dispense, and I kind of stole his thunder. So we always say BioWatch should help you with the detection of a potential BT events gone on. It's not the only way you would detect a BT event. It's just one way to detect a BT event. As I mentioned before, I kind of consider it as a smoke alarm. We find out in day 1 something's going on, not in day 5 or day 6 that something's going on. 2 kind of big things to focus on is that what a bar means and what a bar does not mean. So a BioWatch actionable result does not mean that you have a BT event going on. It does not mean that you have viable organism that's still out there. Our analysis that we do, we look for DNA. So even if the organism's dead, its DNA is still out there, so we can detect it. But only viable organism gets people sick. And a bar also does not mean that there's a threat to public health. What it does mean is that we found that specific DNA sequence or code for that organism on our filter, and we let the locals know there's some additional investigation they need to do. Once again, early detection is going to give our locals more options, and more options is to give us the ability to save more lives. Once again, for the decide, so the network will go off that we've had a detection. Hopefully it's going to allow our health authorities and our leaders to easily decide that they're going to want to request the SNS. Once again, if we have multiple units going off for unique organisms, some of these organisms, once again, are endemic. Some are not to the state of Texas. Some of them are only endemic in Asia and other parts of the world. So if we picked up a rare organism, that should be an indication to our local health authorities that there's some type of nefarious act going on. Our results are analytical results. We get a PCR analytical result, verified, approved analytical protocol, which is going to give the health authorities some more information to make their decision. And then once again, early detection is going to give us more options. And then that's it for BioWatch, unless you guys have any questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. What is the mechanism for, say, hospital labs if the clinician decides that this could be a potential organism they need to test for? If that lab doesn't normally have that lab test, it goes out. What is the mechanism if you have a bar and you suspect that you may see this in the community, the hospital labs are alerted and have the availability of that testing in a expedient manner?
As far as, to my knowledge, and I'm not a lab expert, but when it comes to the hospital screening, their Sentinel labs, they can do a certain amount of testing, and when it gets to a certain phase, and it's supposed to go to the LRN for the confirmation. So I would imagine it would follow the same policy or the same procedure. Did that answer your question? No, I can tell by the look it didn't.
No, because when I request a test and the lab's sent out, it'll take up to 5 or 6 days to come back.
Correct. And that's kind of the whole purpose of BioWatch, because you're right, that if they pulled a sample from me, most of the things I've seen, it's going to be at least 4 to 6 days if we followed the normal chain of events. I don't think they have anything set up to expedite anything like that. To my knowledge, it would just follow your normal chain of command. Everything would have to go through the LRN for their final verification.
I'm sorry, what is LRN?
Sorry, Laboratory Response Network. So it's a series, go ahead.
So if there's not something immediately set up for a backup for this, is that not a weak link in the chain?
Sure. I mean, it is. The BioWatch is not meant to augment or take away our normal procedures. It's just one more surveillance tool, like our over-the-counter cells or our chief ER complaint data or our first watch for our first responders. It's just to give us an idea that there's something going on that we need to do some additional investigation.
Well, I understand that, but with your graph at 5 days, if your goal is to actually begin treatment before 5 days, it seems that there should be some trigger that if you do experience an event, that the hospital labs across Texas are notified and there's some testing made available immediately. So if there is a clinician that says, hey, this isn't the flu, this is pulmonary anthrax or something like that, that they would have the immediate availability of testing via the state or something. It just seems to make sense.
Thank you, Rick.
To me.
Actually, a great question. This is really kind of new to me. I've just kind of assumed some of this in the last several months. Yeah, I mean, if you have an actionable result, I think the process would be a little different because of the signs and symptoms. You might do some things a little differently. I really don't know the lab. I know we have about 9 laboratory response networks. They have some reagents. They can do some testing. Our state lab certainly has, but I don't know how long it takes. But I'm going to take that back and try to find out a little bit more about the laboratory stuff, unless, Michael, you know. But a great question. Now I got work to do.
Yeah, because I think all ER docs are pretty astute clinicians.
Sure. They are pretty.
And if they actually pick this up, it seems to me that it would go somewhere immediately so we can curtail this before we have 1,000 sick people on our hands.
Okay.
I've attended some of the training that the LRN in the Houston area has done with hospital labs. There is a point in which the hospital lab will have to send it to the LRN for them to rule out what it may be. And the LRNs have to follow CDC requirements for testing, and they use the gold standard. So there's no litmus test to do a quick response. They actually have to try to grow it in order to figure out what it is, and that's what causes the delay. If they can't rule it out, then it'll go to the state lab.
I thought they were actually doing PCR on these things.
They can do some PCR, but for clinical purposes, they're going to have to grow it. The PCRs are done on the environmental samples.
So our BioWatch, we just do PCR. They don't try to culture it or grow it. And then I know for the LRN, the way they verify, they really confirm it, is they have to grow it and be able to look at it and say, yes, it is Bacillus anthracis. They have a little bit different policy or procedure.
So I think it sort of goes to the discussions that we've had before about connecting the dots between the public health side and the medical side. Because she's right, the clinicians are going to be, yeah, that's great, grow up, but I've got a guy who's dying in front of me. And I realize that sometimes you don't have to wait because you just treat what you see. But it just is another example of our need to connect the dots, whether it's laboratory go teams that come and help, whatever.
Well, that's exactly my point, is that the labs need to be informed of what their resources are before this happens. The ER docs, or who are, clinic docs, usually send them to us anyway, but we need to be apprised of what's the sort of the steps we need to take and how soon are these lab results going to be back. If I suspect it, of course I'm going to treat it. And we're sure as heck not going to grow anthrax in our hospital lab. I mean, it has to go to the state or to CDC. But I just, as an ER doc, I want to know, what's my backup in this? If I suspect it, I'll treat it. But if I have no idea that that's what it is, that's the first issue. And two, if I do suspect it, I don't want to treat everybody with Cipro before I find out I really am treating the flu.
Mm-hmm. And so hopefully on that local call, we have LRN people that are on the local call. We have the CAT-RAC folks or the RMOC folks or the MOC folks on that call. So at the same time when we're deciding kind of what everybody's going to do, we sure hope that when we're off that call, people are notifying the people that they need to notify and let them know there could be something else going on. As far as getting a true analytical confirmation from that clinical sample, to my knowledge, it's going to have to follow the normal protocol of get screened at the lab, go to the LRN, they're going to work their magic, and it may take 4 to 5 days for them to come back and say, yes, it really is anthrax.
But if there's something that's picked up by BioWatch, my understanding from what you're saying is that hospitals and local first responders will be notified within a couple of hours of being found on the
Yes.
On the
yes.
detector.
So on that local call, EMS, fire, we have our RAC, our MOCs, all those people are on that call, and that's the purpose for everyone to talk about what are you seeing in your ER, what are you seeing on your EMS runs, and let's try to connect all these dots and try to get some type of, at least the framework of the jigsaw puzzle going to where we can move forward with our response.
But I'm also thinking in the response, in the aspect of prophylaxing first responders if that's necessary early on.
Yes, and so most of the backs have it set up is that we know the guys that are going out that night to do sampling, they're definitely going to get prophylaxed pretty much immediately if the health authority thinks that this is a legitimate detection. And then before they start profiling all first responders and the whole public, they're going to want to get a little bit more information. So the guys that go out the first night, if it turns out to be a false alarm or a nothing burger, as we call it, they may have taken an extra pill or two for no reason, and then they'll stop taking their pills at the time. And most of our backs have it kind of tiered, where the people operational that first night, they'll call tier 1, they'll get their pills that night. Then they have kind of a tier 2, which is all first responders and critical staff, and then tier 3 is generally the public as a whole.
I think we need to make a parking lot for this to be discussed when we finally get to the whole RMOC thing. I think that's a perfect world, and I don't think those dots are all connected across the state.
Okay.
How is that notification put out? So you're gonna notify first responders and local hospitals and stuff like that? How is that?
It would go through our normal channels. So the initial notification is done to the back officials. That's generally done by an electronic notification system on a local level. And then once people get off that local call and we kind of figure out what's going on, the EPI should be contacting their hospitals to work, the event. And then we're going to have management from fire, police, and EMS on that local call. And then they would start to notify their folks out in the field as they deemed appropriate after that local call.
See it from our perspective, to make sure that it moves from jurisdictional responders to private responders.
Sure.
And there's where I think we don't have it okay.
So, Wanda, you're making a motion for further discussion in, what is your motion?
Well, when we finally get to the whole RMOC thing, whether or not that's here, or that's wherever, I just think we need to put it on the plate so that when he doesn't roll off,
Okay.
he gets missed.
Okay. Thank you. Do you guys mind, do y'all have time sensitive that you need to be out of here at a specific time? Okay. Would y'all mind if we put this on hold, because I know Dee Dee has to get out of here pretty soon, and so do y'all mind if we just talk about STEER real quick and then we'll get back to this? Okay. Okay. So Sharon, I'm going to turn it over to you. We're switching gears here for a second to talk about STEER.
Right. I had intended to report at the last meeting, but unfortunately had to have surgery, so that kept me from being here. The update is the following. The STEER program has been rolled out. It's been announced to all of the state, the county and city chief elected officials. That went out in early March. The registration has a new system in place, and the 211 call takers that are taking registrations have been trained. That was done in the latter part of February, and they began actually receiving registrations about the middle of March. As of yesterday or the day before, there were already a few hundred STEER registrations in the system. This year we'll run the STEER registrations and keep the TAR registrations so that both of the data is available to the data custodians. Next year is when the re-registration process will begin. The program informational sessions about the program were held at the State Emergency Management Conference. Local data custodian webinars have already been held this month. We've done 3. I believe there are 3 more to go, as well as a in-classroom session that's going to be here in Austin for those people who would prefer to be face-to-face with the instructors. A paper form is being developed for paper registrations. A STEER website and an online registration is also going to be developed. That's been delayed a little bit because of some contract issues and some response things that held it up, but we're expecting that will come on before much longer. Dee Dee Powell is the point of contact for the STEER program at TDM. She's done an excellent job with the webinars as well as the folks who maintain the database itself. I've actually been on with the webinars with them. It's been a very positive response by the data custodians that are there. The point that we need to get out to folks, though, is that if a jurisdiction had a data custodian under the TAR program, they need to re-identify whether or not they want those individuals to be the data custodian under the STEER program. It won't just automatically happen. And those forms were sent along with the notice of the announcement of the program to the chief elected officials, but they also went to the local EMCs. So if we can get that information out to folks, that will be great. The program is, in fact, not only registering individuals, it's registering those licensed facilities like nursing homes, assisted living centers that were required under state statute to register. And so if they'll dial 211, they'll be asked automatically, are you registering a facility or are you registering an individual? And go from there. Dee Dee, did I miss anything?
No, I just want to say that we do have the paper form done. I received the final copy last night. As soon as I review it, we'll be sending it out to the data custodians and to the EMCs so that they're aware that the form is completed. We will be asking those individuals that are still using the old TAR registration form to please discontinue that because the questions are not the same, so we want to make sure we gather the correct information. And then by the end of the month, we will be putting out a Spanish translation of that as well. We're working on it right now. We just take some time to get it together. As Sharon said, we've had really positive feedback from some of the local governments. People are coming on board more and more every day as far as them wanting to participate in the program and determining how they're going to do that, because it does take some time on their part to work through the registrations and determine where those individuals are located and what their needs are. So please tell anyone that they're welcome to give me a call or email me if they have questions. I'm here as their representative at the state level, as well as Sharon and all the other committee members. The committee continues to meet, and we are going to be making some improvements on the system. We're now working on, or will be working on, a press release that we can send out to the local governments that they can use with their local media to be able to get that information out to their individuals, and some flyers that they can pass out at public forums and things, so that they have documentation that they can provide to individuals.
Thanks, Dee Dee.
Any questions from the... Any public questions or comments or discussion on this? Okay. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you, Sharon. Okay. Continuing. Switching gears again.
All right, thank you for having me this morning. My name is Michael Poole. I am the State Strategic National Stockpile Coordinator working for Department of State Health Services. I've been in this position for a little over 3 years and working for Rick Bays since about December. Once again, this is just high-level information going into what assets are in the Strategic National Stockpile, briefly talking about the distribution of those assets here in Texas, and then talking about Cmte containers and the Cmte program. Once again, high level, going to be talking about the composition, distribution, and dispensing in the Cmte program. As Brian mentioned, he did say he took my thunder, and that's the 4 Ds, and they could be the 5 Ds. But the 4 Ds are detect, decide, distribute, dispense, and the 5th one you can throw in as demob. With the BioWatch, detect and decide, those are the key things that BioWatch can help decision makers do in order to start dispensing or distribution and dispensing. So that's how the BioWatch program and SNS overlap in those 2 components there. So the SNS mission is to deliver critical medical assets to the site at a national emergency. So we're dealing with medical assets here, which are a little different than just water and ice alone. The mission here in Texas is we're trying to get pills into people. That's the name of the game in short and sweet terms, in one phrase. So what is the SNS? Basically, it's two components. We have the 12-hour push pack, which is broad spectrum, where you really don't know what agent you're dealing with. And then you have specific item support. And specific item support comes from several different avenues that the federal government has. They have some purchasing power through the Veterans Administration, as well as they also have some contracts with distributors and manufacturers of drugs. So with a 12-hour push pack, as you can see the blue arrow, or if you can't see it, I'll tell you, the blue arrow is pointing to a man probably about 5'10", average height. So this is one push pack container. About 130 of those individual containers make up the long one. So we're dealing with a lot of product right here for the 12-hour push pack. And the reason it's called 12-hour push pack is based on the request, it can be sent anywhere in the nation within 12 hours. So we'll be able to receive this within 12 hours. Once again, broad spectrum support here. There's 10 total located across the nation, and that's how CDC can promise that they'll be there within the request of 12 hours. And they exercise that, and they've been able to do that on a regular basis. Delivered by world-class transportation partners, usually FedEx here. Each package, once again, 130 containers, over 50 tons of product, 500,000 doses of 10-day antibiotic regimens. It used to be on an 80-20 doxy to Cipro. Now they've moved to a 50-50 doxy to Cipro. Just kind of reiterating the point once again, broad spectrum for this 12-hour push pack. It can either travel in a jumbo jet, I think 747, or 8 tractor trailers. Once again, in looking at it from the state perspective, we'd have to have the assets for the plane to land and then the transportation to receive those 8 tractor trailers. Things that are in the push pack, of course, the antibiotics, Doxy, Cipro are the main ones, oral and intravenous. Airway management supplies, I think it is important to notice that it's pediatric and adult supplies there. Same with IV administration, wound care supplies for blast and burns. So that's the broad spectrum that we're talking about. Those really aren't a whole big bang for your buck when you're dealing with Houston with 6 million people. 500,000 doses of antibiotics isn't really going to get you far. So when we plan to use the 12-hour pushback, it's going to be used for first responders, not so much open to the public. So we'll get it in and be able to prophylax the first responders, and they can continue doing their mission. And for the rest of us, we'll have to wait for a managed inventory. Managed inventory comes within 24 to 36 hours on the request. And this is the real big bang for your buck. This is a picture of a warehouse. I think it's our warehouse, actually. So it is a little smaller than what CDC would deal with. But in managed inventory, it is 96 to 98% of their entire material, of all their SNS assets. Once again, I said it can arrive 24 to 36 hours upon the request. And it's really ordered when you know what you're dealing with. So that's one of the benefits of BioWatch. It's that early detection, and it can tell you what agent we're dealing with so that we can request the right countermeasures for the event. And also, push package, it's really not going to be enough. Again, 500,000 doses. We'll need more when we're dealing with larger cities. Same supplies are in the managed inventory that are in the 12-hour push pack, your amoxicillin or antibiotics, and I'll run through these slides. In addition, there's also the antitoxins for botulinum. I know they have that there. Antivirals, we received quite a few of these for the H1N1 response in 2009. Nerve agent antidotes, we can also request a larger supply of those if the Cmpacks are not enough. Vaccinations, they have the anthrax vaccine is in there too. There's been some studies saying that it could help with not only prophylaxis but for treatment as well. Burn, blast, and radiation items are also available upon request. So that just goes into some of the items of what's in the SNS assets. So next, I'll go into how the distribution. Going back to the 4 Ds: detect, decide, distribute, and dispense. So how do we actually distribute? Well, we'll receive the SNS assets, whether it be the 12-hour pushback or the managed inventory, from the federal agencies. We'll receive this at a RSS site, receiving, staging, and storing site, basically a big warehouse. And one of the things we learned from H1N1 is that we can really make this process more efficient by using private partners and buddying up with them, because they do this on a day-to-day basis. They work in the warehouses, they man the forklifts, they know how to pack, they know how to ship. So we have some contracts around the state with private businesses to help us out getting this distribution out. And then they would be distributed, transported to the local points of dispensing. This is where the rubber meets the road and the pills are dispensed to the public. Just another way to show it, you have our federal partners bringing it to the state RSS site, receiving, staging, storing. And then from there, it would go to points of dispensing. It could go to treatment centers or other delivery sites. Some other states, they use a regional distribution node where it would come to the RSS and then go to a regional dispensing node or distribution node, and then from there down to the pods. For the state of Texas, we found out that this is more efficient, where we don't have that secondary drop-off to repackage and repalletize to go back down to the pods. Dispensing, not going to get in too much detail on this versus a slide, but it is the most critical function. It's the most critical, and it's the most difficult too, because you're dealing with people, you don't know how they're going to act, and you're dealing with throughputs of between 500 to 5,000 across the state, just depending on what city and what pod you're actually in. So that's throughput per hour. So 500 people to 5,000 people going through a point of dispensing per hour in order to prophylax the entire jurisdiction. So we're not limited to point of dispensing or the traditional pod. There are other types of dispensing options that we have out there and that we are using here in Texas. The top one, the red one, is open pods. That's the traditional pod. It can be basically your public. They'll show up, schools, arenas, public venues, high schools. They're used for that. Closed pods, we're really looking at this, and we like to get private businesses, government agencies, universities to prophylax their own employees. And right now we're looking at possibly changing that name from closed pod to agency pod, so that it doesn't have that sensation of, hey, this is a private party and nobody can come to it. So we're looking at changing the name for our purposes. Pre-deployment, this is for first responders, and it's been held up at the FDA for approval. But it would be just a little med kit with your pills of doxy, antivirals that you could keep in your closet, and then to prophylax yourself when the time comes. We really like this idea, but still haven't been able to get federal approval on it. Drive-through pods are similar to the open pods, except instead of walking, you are driving through the pods. Once again, usually at high schools where the roads are beneficial and can accommodate many vehicles. Mobile dispensing, this was done over in East Texas in Region 4-5. They did a bus with police patrol, and they went to some rural cities and went door to door handing out pills to people. And that's kind of similar to the postal plan, except for the postal plan it would be the USPS employees, and however they would have to have two two law enforcement agents with them at all times. So it really doesn't benefit the locals here in Texas. It would just be too much for the local law enforcement to handle, to escort the postal employees door to door for that dispensing option. And one that we took out from H1N1 was the pharmacy. The Texas antiviral toolkit. We learned that we can get product out to a good portion of the state, I believe over 95%, by using the pharmacies alone. So that's something we still have in our back pocket, and with the conversations of H7 and 9, we would most likely use that option. So moving on to Cmte. Here's a picture of Cmte right now. Currently, we have 140 Cmte containers across the state of Texas. Once again, more in those highly densely populated areas. And what is a Cmte? It is the forward placement of nerve agent antidote in communities. They're mainly housed in hospitals, EMS stations, fire stations, and a few local health departments have them as well. What they contain are the Mark I kits, which they're looking to replace them in 2014 with the Duodote kits. It's got atropine in it, vials of atropine, 2-PAM, diazepam, and sterile water for injections. So there's two different types of Cmte containers. One is an EMS container, and this container is for about 445 patients. Here's all the product broken out. There's 100 EMS containers out here in the state of Texas, and there's 40 hospital containers. And on this next slide, I'll show you the hospital containers. And the big difference you'll see is for the EMS containers, you have a higher number of Mark I auto injectors, and for the Cmte for the hospital, serving for about 1,000 patients, you'll have more of the vials, the diazepam vials that the nurses and ER docs can use. And that's all I have. I'm ready for questions.
What are we doing about the atropine and doing that being on back order or you can't get it?
Right. So the nice part with this is all the hospitals and EMS, we're just hosts. So they just hold the product. CDC and the federal government are responsible for stocking that. So they have not had any issues in keeping this product on the shelves. They are using the SLEP shelf life extension program with the DoD in order to keep that product sustainable in circulation. Yes.
I just had a curiosity about, you say each Cmte will treat about 100 patients. How many milligrams of atropine are you allotting per patient?
Oh, that was a misspoken. This should cover about 454 patients.
But how many milligrams of atropine are you allotting per patient to come up with that number?
Should be about 3. I think 3 doses is the max that you could do, but I'm not the expert as far as determining the amount of doses to give.
Okay, I'm just curious because in a nerve agent, basically exposure, it's not unusual to use 30 milligrams of atropine per patient. That 0.3 is cardiac, that is not a nerve agent, and you actually give atropine until the bronchorrhea clears up. So I was just curious how you came up with 100 patients or whatever, knowing that each patient may take a lot more atropine than 1 or 2 milligrams.
And that's just a number that CDC recommended for us, but I can definitely see your point where you would use, if the patient is really in serious condition, you would use more. Great question.
Any further discussion or questions?
How do we find out where those EMS units are at?
You can talk with your local SNS coordinator or your regional SNS coordinator, and they can share that information with you.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, Mike, you have a question?
I don't think I have the answer that she was looking for because I'm one of the Cmte coordinators for the Austin area. The number comes up on there was the initial dose of 3 Mark 1 injections per individual, just on the initial get-go. So you're going to have 6 milligrams, right from the initial auto injectors, the 3 that you give, and then hopefully you've got the ability to get them to some sort of definitive care center where you're going to need to give 20, 30, 40 milligrams of it to physically cure them. So that's where that number originally came from, was just the initial auto injector amount that was in there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
If I'm not mistaken, you get on the first Mark 1 kit, if you're not symptomatic, you don't give yourself another one. So only if you're still symptomatic, you give yourself an additional Mark 1 kit, and if you continue that to a maximum of 3 doses.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you all for taking time to come speak with us. I'm going to move on to Victor. We have a lot to discuss. There's been multiple EMTF deployments in the last couple of months. We've had now 2 no-notice events, west, and then the tornadoes last night, and several planned events as well. So I'm going to let Victor take it away.
All right, thank you. You're absolutely right. It has been busy. Since the last time we met, one of the things I've determined is that all 8 of the EMTF regions have actually seen real patients or real people. All 8 regions in some form have actually gone out and done something that was real, as opposed to just training and exercises that we've been doing. So it's amazing that since the last time we met that we've had that much of activity. The storms last night, tornado moving through Granbury across northern part of Texas. We were in complete communications with EMTF2 as they were standing up, determining what the assets were available, monitoring the traffic. Last night what we'd heard, I don't know if it's changed this morning, the last I'd heard was 6 fatalities, 7 still missing this morning. EMTF2 brought a strike team leader on, or a task force leader, put him on alert, put 2 ambulance strike teams on alert, 3 of the ambuses on alert, and then deployed one of those 3 to Granbury, where I believe they ended up transporting 14 patients from that facility. So we had the EMTF engaged. The other regions were monitoring, had their assets available. Everybody was ready to move forward if needed. So with that, to talk about the ambuses, where are we? Last time we talked, we didn't quite have them all. Now we have 12 of the 13 are licensed and operational. So the last one to be licensed actually is the last one bought. The Houston Fire Bus was the last purchase, and their paperwork has been submitted for initial review, and they are in the process of licensing it now. So it should be licensed soon. So that'll give us 13 of the 13 licensed and operational in Texas. Those buses were used recently, before last night, in West. We were able to mobilize 4 of the ambuses to respond to West. 203 out of Cedar Hill was closest. They actually felt the blast and felt it shake. 401 out of Palestine was dispatched as a regional response. 801 out of Schertz and 201 from Frisco all responded to West. In addition to that, we went to support EMTF 7 and their efforts in their local region in coordination with them to help facilitate what they were doing. Took the Type 2 mobile medical unit, complete with staff, physicians, nurses, paramedics, techs, comms, everything, to the area, staged at the DDC until they were set up to provide care. You can see the team. What most people don't know, you see the picture at the top, there was actually a nurse strike team that was rostered and available immediately after that. They were standing by at Temple ready to go to any of the healthcare facilities that needed it. So that was our first activation, no notice, of a nurse strike team for a regional response that stood up and worked very well. So they were available to go if needed. They weren't deployed into a facility, but they were available if they were needed. So you can see the teams that responded with the MMU as well as the DPMU. EMTF supported logistically in helping with the DPMU that was deployed out of CETRAC, not yet an EMTF asset, but a common theme of us going to help. They brought their disaster portable morgue unit, used their capabilities and their people to do the Family Assistance Center, which was well needed in West. Medical incident support teams set up assisting the DDC. That's actually one of the doctors and one of the task force leaders inside the DDC helping the captain with the West incident. So kind of the big picture of all the different things that were happening in West at the same time. We're able to do that. We continue with our MOAs. We're up to 264 of the new state MOAs that are signed right now. Just yesterday, EMTF 11 was able to demobilize their stuff. They've been set up for their full-scale exercise for the last 3 days. They treated 52 simulated patients and transported 21 patients via the ambulance to 4 different hospitals over the last couple of days down in the south. Fiesta happened. Had a little rain event to go with it, so 2 days of setting up and supporting for Fiesta. The impact here was it came after Boston, so everything had to be rethought. Bomb dogs came in, cleared the area, everything was built with a traumatic vision as opposed to a weather-related impact, is what do we need to change as a result of Boston. EMTF 2, full-scale exercise, most people don't even realize happened the morning of West, was phase 1. They were setting up their full EMTF components with ambulance strike teams and buses. They set up their Zoom Road tent along with about 6 other of their Base X tents. They had the full parking lot set up at one of their hospitals doing a complete MMU deployment and test of all their assets. Everything was set up and operational, but in the event of West, the next morning they scaled their exercise back down not to take away assets from the region. So they were set up and had a great exercise. EMTF 7 was immediately following the Boston Marathon. They were set up on the finish line to provide care. So they immediately had to think about what changes this for them as well. So EMTF 7 set up their MMU near the finish line. EMTF 6 and EMTF 7 collectively worked to support the MS 150 that went from Houston to Austin. Oop. Oh, and then there was, prior to that, it seems like it was forever ago, that actually was set up for South Padre. Since we met last, some of y'all have seen this, but we supported South Padre with the EMTF. Ambus supported Spring Break. 31 patients transported by Ambus, 39 by ambulance. At the same time, we were on the opposite end of the state supporting the Baton Memorial Death March. Ambus supported that in White Sands, New Mexico. So in South Padre, what you see there is a tent right in the middle of those zillion people. I think there's 39 that were transported by ambulance. I can't see my slide there. 31 by ambus. 2 were flown out. 242 patients treated and released out of the tent. And then again, the Baton Memorial Death March. Over 5,000 entries. 395 patients treated in the tents. So that's how we were spread out from one end to the other. And that's how busy we've been over the last 3 months. And that doesn't even touch all of the stuff. These are just the highlights. All the regions have been doing other things, included training and exercising and trying to continue to engage people. The real-time activities have actually brought a lot of people in who've come and said, we want to help, we want to be engaged, we want to be part of the teams, what do we do? So it's been a true success story in all 8 of the EMTF regions.
And you've been a busy man.
It's been busy.
And we've determined that we should never have a no-notice event when Victor's in the air.
Yes. Yes, during the West, I was in an airplane. When I landed, it was a whole new environment.
So I want to get the work group leaders up here real quick to talk about the recent meetings and some of the lessons learned and after-action reports. Shalon, do you have something for MMU?
So the MMU work group met Tuesday. We actually talked a lot about things that Victor just went over. Everybody discussed their exercises and actual events. We talked about some lessons learned, and we've been working on some little fixes that came out of the exercises. So we're going to have a smaller work group working on the SOGs and getting those finalized before we push them up to ops and exec. And little issues also like the T-sheets and just operational issues that we all experienced out of our different activations. So we're all going to continue to work on that. I think Victor covered pretty much everything we were talking about.
I know one of the things that we've talked about and has been a concern is, as Victor alluded to, rethinking the security of all of our assets. And, you know, in the past, we've always set up on the finish line or always set up kind of in the same place for Fiesta. And with the, you know, with the recent bombings and new issues that we need to think about, can either of y'all talk to any of those issues or any of the changes that are being looked at?
Well,
for security?
at Fiesta, we did have the bomb dogs come through. We also discussed the possibility of needing to push back our assets from the actual finish line to the areas where people would be ending. So just thinking about where we would actually locate our MMUs or other assets at an event.
One of the other things I've been thinking about personally is, you know, social media and Twitter and Facebook. We've really gotten good about talking about what we're doing, where we are, sending pictures, and I just wonder if we need to talk about rethink that.
Yeah,
for
some of the
security
discussions
reasons.
have that we need to rethink our outside publicity, where we're keeping people aware as to, you know, what does that do of giving away our exact location. We want to tell people what we're doing, that we're out there, but we have to rethink it, as you said, with a new view. We have to look at it from a different angle. The other thing we have to do is we have to rethink our capabilities, where we typically set up thinking that this is our mission. Now all of our missions, we have to look at it, regardless of which component it is what could be the impact. It's a mass gathering if it turned into a terroristic type event, and do we have those capabilities with us? We're actually changing some of our PAR levels to support a more traumatic event, which normally what we carried was just a standard configuration, and we're going to increase those capabilities.
Yeah, just thinking about the small things like CAT tourniquets and having major trauma dressings available. The MMUs really was meant to be, you know, a mobile medical hospital and not treating like necessarily mass casualties. So that's one of the things the group's also going to be working at is revamping our trauma supplies and investment of hopefully some CAT tourniquets and things that were lessons learned from Boston.
Any questions or discussion from the committee?
I would just a quick question, and I'd like to know, one of my concerns all along is how well we've been getting the word out to the locals on requesting these resources when they identify the need for EMTF. Out of West on these activations, can you share with me, has this been a proactive measure that's come from the local RAC to get this going, or has the request come up from the local agencies?
It's a joint. Some of it comes from the top and around, and some of it comes from the bottom and up, and some of it is us saying, hey, we're available if you need us, and they go, I hadn't thought about you yet. So I think we're still, you know, young, and people don't think of it first try. There have been some opportunities where we may have could stepped in if we'd got a call really early, but by the time somebody thought of us, it was like, well, maybe not now. Request last night, that came local. The West request was started in a local discussion, then it was validated through the state, and then requested officially through. So yes, we're making it, we're getting some local requests, but we could do a better job, and we need to spend more time with our local officials making aware, because some of them don't really think AMBUS first try, and AMBUS is much like an aircraft. Call early and cancel us if you don't need us, but if you wait too late, our response time's too long, so call early and cancel.
I know CERAC's done a great job of getting out with the local agencies and getting the word out. I just want to share across the state we're doing that as well.
Yes, yes.
Just out of curiosity, any idea what the timeline was last night for the AMBUS requests from the locals?
I think it was about 40 minutes or so when I heard the first traffic about it moving. I think it was about 40 minutes in.
We leaned forward before that.
Yeah, they were up and alert and were aware of it when I actually heard of
And ready to go when it was
Yeah, they were all
requested.
staged and ready.
It seems like, and it's just maybe just perception, it seems like we need to do a better job at working on integrating what we have into DDCs and getting everybody connected on the same page. Because I talk to people from DDCs periodically, and they have no idea what EMTF is. They don't know what any of the assets that we have are. I talk to local people, they don't know what DDC is. They don't know what those terms mean. They don't know who they're supposed to call. So whenever an event does happen, it's just, you know, it's herding cats sometimes.
Exactly, a great.
Like we could do a better job at integrating everything.
And I think that's continued discussion. I actually sat in the AAR at the State Operations Center the other day in result of West, and lots of DDC discussion about EMTF and the capabilities and the things that were there. They used the word EMTF several times. Captain Smith out of Waco, he knows what an EMTF is now and what the capabilities of those components. And so TDM is doing a good job of helping us to spread that, so it's not all the way across yet, but is better known now than it used to be, and we're getting better.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You know, usually when the locals are focused, can get that tunnel vision on the local event, and they can forget about that. So I've got to really give kudos for reaching out.
Absolutely. And as recent last night when I touched base with EMTF2 and said, can I do anything? They said, we're already talking to the DDC. They know we're here. We've got these assets on alert. We're here. 204 is already en route. So at that point, they were engaged, and the DDC was aware that they were there.
Let me just add something. It goes the other direction, too. You know, we're all faced with some federal funding challenges and Congress trying to limit. So we are really pushing and have sent information up and really preached the value of the EMTF resources, particularly ambuses, the mobile medical units, up to the federal level, and hopefully being used by CDC and our OASPR partners to try to continue to make the case that we've got to have that federal preparedness dollars to support our overall efforts. So it's not just getting the information down. We got to get that information up because we have resources in this state that really nobody else has.
What do y'all see as a need from us as the locals in helping get that word out? What is needed?
Actually, you can ask Bruce that question and during the next meeting. He's the one that's been talking mostly to the feds, but I reviewed an article or a message he sent up yesterday. There he is.
Speaking of.
Didn't know you were here, boss.
Thank you. You know, what we need is we need succinct storytelling. And that's really what the feds need right now, and there's a battle going on in Congress right now. People like Dr. Ali Khan from CDC and others are fighting the good fight, trying to justify our funds. And as you all know, we've kind of got the curse of most public health programs where if we do our job really well, the outcome is really difficult to measure. You know, we can't say that if it hadn't been there, here's what would have happened. So they need those anecdotes, they need those stories, they need to hear what we have, how it's been activated, how people appreciate it, how it's been used. So we just need succinct stories. So for every activation that we have, if we could just get a one-pager, just saying here's what happened and here's how the resources were utilized, that goes a long way. If we keep that communication going upstream to CDC and ASPR, it can really help them justify and fight for our programs.
Are we reaching out to all of our local congressional representatives and things like that, getting what we're doing with them, and all these riots? We're inviting them to the regional exercises and stuff?
Leanne, you want to speak to that?
I know, we do that. We send our annual report that outlines all of our information about our MTF and responses during the year. We send that to all the elected officials in our county. So there is a deliberate effort, and we had an exercise that was the exercise that Victor was at and was flying back from when West happened. We had invited all the elected officials in that immediate area as well to that, to come out and see it. So there's a lot of that work been done. The difficulty with the RAC our size is in 19 counties worth of elected officials, it's a lot to show at once. So we're doing our best.
You mentioned the 31st. I hope they're being invited to that kind of KPI.
Yes. So for those of you who were at the hurricane kickoff party last year that they had at Austin Bergstrom on June 1st, who all was here was involved in that? Quite a few people. They're doing it again on May 31st out at Austin Bergstrom and bringing a lot of the assets. And, I think that's definitely a valid point. We need to make sure that our elected officials, I believe they've been invited, but I would encourage everybody to reach out to your local elected officials and encourage them to attend. So that, what's that?
No.
I don't know. Well,
Never mind.
Well, it still wouldn't hurt to get the word out and encourage them to attend. And so everybody who was involved in it, which is everybody in the state, has been somehow involved in a response in the last 2 months. Can we get folks to write up a one-page story about your response and get that to Bruce? Is that something that can be supported?
Or get it to Victor.
Or get it to Victor so that we can get that word out? I think that would kind of be an action item. The other discussions that came out of this, and I won't get into this too terribly much, but would love to hear kind of public comment. There's been a lot of discussion since West on how do we involve, and this has been discussed in TDMS as well, but I think we're really going to focus on it today, is how do we more formalize the mass fatality response. And the DPMU was mobilized during West from CETRAC. They were great partners in that, and there's been a lot of discussion about does that need to be a part of the EMTF as well? And the reason for that is not because it's an emergency medical response, but because it is an ESF-8 response, and there's already the command structure and the logistics structure in place to help, and as well as a rostering structure in place to help formalize that more, so that it's more of a when there's a statewide or a region-wide necessity for mass fatality response. That might be an avenue, and that those discussions are just now beginning. And so I guess, does the committee have any thoughts on that? That's going to be discussed more in TDMS.
Seems like a place to roll it up under. Be easier if you're combining efforts, making it more organized and structured than everybody trying to go off on their own.
It would make sense.
Any public comments or discussion on that?
What is the funding
For
for the
DPMU?
yeah.
Allison, are you able to speak to that? The funding.
Where's the funding coming from that's running for that GPMU?
The funding for the DPMU came through an ASPR grant that's been supported by CETRAC and our partners there. It's currently maintained by CETRAC, but it's staffed by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences. So we're still working at a staffing plan for that. And it's been a good process to work with the RAC, and that deployment for West was a really good learning for us in that regard. You probably can't even hear me when I think about it. So that's where that funding came from. It's the only one in state. It's one of 3 locally owned assets in the nation, and it's, I think, one of 6 in the nation. So
was the grant, was the grant specifically for that?
the grant was specifically for the disaster portable morgue unit and everything it entails, and that's a full structure that can set up with all the equipment and supplies to set up a disaster portable morgue in a structure, in a facility. Sure.
I think that would be one question people would ask, is this going to take away from our other assets? But it doesn't even touch that.
Any other public comment or discussion on that, or EMTFs? Mark?
Yeah, so just considering the other side of the argument, the EMTF model traditionally kind of houses those 4 components, responding and treating live, viable victims. The DPMU obviously is on the other end of that spectrum. So the other end of the conversation is maybe it should be more of a TDMS asset, zoomed out a little bit, since TDMS is that overarching organization, I guess you want to call it. So it's a TDMS asset, but definitely integrate and take advantage of and piggyback off the infrastructure that the EMTF has developed, the rostering of the rostering, the command structure, all that stuff. So possibly, they could do the rostering and help sustain the DPMU operations, but the DPMU operations would be a TDMS function versus an EMTF function.
I think one of the important things to look at with mass fatality is it's not, that kind of response is not as resource heavy as an EMTF normal response. We wouldn't be looking at buying DPMUs for each region.
Right.
It's not practical. It's not a good use of funding. Truly, one DPMU for the state really is enough, just with the amount of time, the amount of activations that would actually have. So it wouldn't be the purchase of AMBUS that we saw across the state. So I think it would be an integrated structure, like Mark is saying, from a state level and a regional level, because the infrastructure is already built, but without the dollar sign that we saw for EMTF.
Without having redundant DPMUs all across the state, which, I think everybody agrees that that's not necessary.
What is the activation time?
Am I in the state or not? I was in DC when it was deployed to West. It was a little bit challenging. For the activation time, it went out with the AMBUS and with the rest of the assets that were sent with the building trailer and all of that. So the activation time is pretty quick. The people are a little more, we're working on that mobilization process.
Yeah, the actual physical assets were on the road with everybody else that night, and then Allison and...
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
And then Allison and Jason Wiersema were on a plane that night and were there about noon the next day. So, pretty quick.
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think we need to duplicate those assets across the state, but I think the connection to that is we may need family support teams.
Yes.
Across the state.
There's no mic on that side. I got it.
Sorry, thank you. I was saying that I agree that we don't need to duplicate the resource across the state, but we may need family support teams across the state. And so that may be how we flesh that out a little bit. But we certainly don't need multiples of the DPMUs.
Victor?
I was just going to say, from the EMTF perspective, we've discussed this in fact that we think the DPMU, as it is, where it is, they're the subject matter experts. That is the absolute answer, and it's not an EMTF asset. Then it's not something we duplicate. We lean to them. We support them. If they have logistical needs or something, some guys that can help put up tents or move trucks and trailers, we have that capability that we can lend to them if they need it. In no way is it something that we would look to duplicate.
Are there MOAs? Are there MOAs in place where other areas can request it if needed?
The DPMU is a state asset, and so it can be deployed anywhere within the state, and it does come with some amount of personnel. What we're looking at now and what we'll talk more in TDMS is building out urban-based mass fatality response teams where we have more of an assessment focus. Rather than sending the asset initially, we would send an assessment to see if it's actually necessary. And so it would be more personnel heavy rather than equipment heavy.
Okay, so we'll continue this discussion in TDMS. I wanted to leave just a couple of minutes. Dudley's going to talk real quick about schedule changes in GTAC. Sir?
19, 18, 17.
That clock is very intimidating. Hello, hello. All right. So, for those who've been around the GTAC process for a while, you'll know for the last 9 to 12 months, the GTAC Council has been trying to see if there's a better, more efficient way to conduct these meetings every quarter. And one of their goals has been to maybe see if they could get it down to 2 days, and to enable a format that would get more of the council members here throughout the entire process. And so after November last year, when there was somewhat of a violent reaction to their first attempt at this, they've met with the what is known as the Executive Committee of GTAC, which is the committee chairs, and come up with a few other scheduling options to look at. And what they've asked for this meeting selection is for every committee to prioritize these 5 options as far as which one you think would work best and which one you think would work worst from 1 to 5. So I'm going to roll through the 5 options, kind of show you the differences. There's a summation sheet at the end, and then you guys can discuss it and figure out how you want to prioritize it. The first thing is that all schedules will in this process are looking at beginning with a 1-hour GTAC meeting. The point of that is to try to coordinate all the committees. We have a number of committees sometimes that kind of stray out of their lanes, or they may get a topic assigned to them, and they may, in the process of handling that, stray into another committee's lane. And so this 1-hour meeting is for the reports that we get at every GTAC council meeting, as well as trying to make sure that those lanes are well defined, and other committees to hear if a committee is going to talk about something that interests them, so it's not a surprise through the 2 or 3 day process. Each of these allow for 10 committee meetings. Day 2 on all of these begin at 8 o'clock in the morning instead of 9 o'clock. And each of these options ends with a 2-hour GTAC meeting instead of a 3-hour GTAC meeting. You'll notice the 1 hour at the front and the 2 hours at the end. The council feels they can get all the work done in a 3-hour meeting based upon a little bit better organization with the pre-meeting of an hour and the 2 hours at the end for reports and action items. So the first option is 10 committee meetings of an hour each. Day 1 starting at 1 in the afternoon with a 1-hour GTAC meeting and ending at 6 o'clock in the evening on day 1. And then day 2 starting at 8 in the morning, working through lunch and going into the main GTAC council meeting at 2 o'clock, and that lasting from 2 to 4. So the day on day 2 would be over at 4 o'clock. So basically 1 o'clock on day 1 through 4 o'clock on day 2, ending at 6 and no lunch, and ending at 4 on day 2. Option B is very similar, however, they cut each meeting down to 50 minutes to give a 10-minute overlap and a 10-minute meeting swap over time. Again, starts at 1, gets over at 4 on day 2. It's a similar schedule, they just cut everything down by 50 minutes. Option C starts at 10 o'clock on day 1 with a 1-hour GTAC meeting, and then you have an hour and a half meeting, an hour for lunch, an hour and a half, an hour and a half, and an hour and a half meeting ending at 6 o'clock on day 1, beginning again at 8 o'clock on day 2, hour and a half meetings with an hour break for lunch, an hour and a half meetings up until 6 o'clock, and then GTAC would meet from 6 until 8 o'clock on day 2. A little bit later option there on day 2. But beginning at 10 o'clock on day 1. Option D is kind of a hybrid. You got the 1-hour meeting starting at 9. You have a couple of 1-hour meetings, and then you have a break for lunch and an hour and a half, and an hour and a half meeting getting over at 5:30 on day 1, beginning at 8 o'clock on day 2 for an hour and a half, an hour and a half, an hour and a half, and the rest of the meetings finishing out that day are hour and a half in length. You do have a 1-hour lunch break on day 2, with GTAC sitting down at 4:30 in the afternoon and getting done by 6:30 in the afternoon. And that's schedule option D. And then schedule option E has GTAC with their 1-hour pre-meeting beginning at 8:30 on day 1. You have an hour and a half meeting, a 1-hour meeting, a break for lunch. You come back with another 1-hour meeting, 2 hour and a half meetings ending up at 5 o'clock on day 1. Coming in on day 2 at 8 o'clock in the morning, hour and a half, hour and a half, hour and a half, lunch, and come back after lunch with 2 more 1-hour meetings. So basically you have 4 1-hour meetings, I believe, and 6 hour and a half meetings. And then GTAC would meet at 3 and go from 3 until 5. So that's the 5 options that the executive group has come up with. Here's kind of a synopsis of when it begins on day 1, when it ends on day 1, when day 2 ends, because remember all day 2 starts at 8 o'clock. Is there a lunch break available? Are there any 1-hour meetings? If so, how many? And are there any hour and a half meetings? And if so, how many of those? The key around all these different schedule types, and a lot of people have been asking this, the executive committee really, we understand these weeks are full for a lot of us. We come in on Monday and we're here until Friday regardless of the 3-day GTAC schedule because of all the other things that we're involved in. But the thought was to try to make GTAC as efficient as possible but still be able to get the work done. And a number of these schedules were developed after a lot of folks brought up points about one of the more valuable things of the GTAC meeting process isn't just what happens in this hour and a half you guys are up here at the table, but it's what happens over lunch, it's what happens in the evening, it's what happens over breakfast, which is the networking and the time to get to know each other and to solve our problems one-on-one with other people in the state. And so some of those schedules have that built in as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, Dr. Kidd, we kind of need to determine a priority of what the disaster committee thinks is appropriate.
So, do they want to vote from us?
Yeah,
as to what our vote
we're
is?
going to need to give Jane a priority. Our number one option is this. Our number 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
I tried to do 1, 2, and the other 3 tied for last place, but I wasn't allowed to do that, so I'm not going to let you guys do that either. So I'm just telling you.
Brad, you had a comment?
Well, just watching the clock, I'll try and make this short and sweet, but I've got some real concerns about going anything less. We've had a 90-minute meeting, and we touched, 3 items on our agenda?
Fully agree.
Anything less than 90 minutes, 90 minutes is not adequate, and this committee with our partners has done some incredible work, and I hate to see that get trimmed back even more.
I fully agree. Does anyone disagree that we need to have at least an hour and a half meeting, that cutting back to an hour or 50 minutes is not going to work for this group?
Except it's A and B at the bottom.
I agree, we
So-
need at least 90 minutes.
So, so D and E, to me, I don't know what the group thinks, seems like the best options for this particular committee.
Yes.
Do you all agree?
D first, E second?
Second that.
Yes.
So we have a motion and a second from this committee that D would be our first choice, E would be our second choice. And that any option that does not allow for hour and a half meetings would not be good for this committee.
Right.
Jane, does that meet your needs? Does that meet your needs from us? Yeah. D would be our first choice, E would be our second choice.
To me, A and B is not even an option.
One of the things between D and E, just so you know, is the executive group came up with, and a lot of us were leaning towards the E just because it has more flexibility. There's a number of committees that have said they could get by on 1 hour. But you'll notice we didn't say, well, this 1 hour block is for EMS and this hour and a half block is for disaster. And the thought behind that was there may be a point in time, probably you guys cannot even fathom this, but potentially at some point in time there could be, oh my Lord, we're all going to die. Wow.
All right.
That's worse than Epley with the hammer. Oh my Lord. The thought was that there could be committees that normally need an hour and a half that maybe have a short agenda and could take an hour. So those could actually be rotated and chosen by different committees at different times. So that's really the big difference between D and E, other than the start and end times. Oh my gosh.
So I suppose you could put C in as your third option.
C would be the third option.
And A and B is not workable for us at this time.
Right. Does that work? Okay. All righty. Well,
one other thing before you dismiss, I know we have to because I'm afraid that thing's going to go off again, is that, Jason, I don't know if you can get a wide audience shot, but if everybody could just look at the camera closest to you and everybody go, hi, Eric, how are you? Because I don't know if Dr. Kidd's been getting text messages for the last hour and a half, but I have been. So he is well engaged in the process of the committee. So.
all right. Thank you to everybody. I understand our next meeting is August 21st. Is that correct, Reagan? No,
That week.
I think sometime in August. Okay. All right. Thanks to everybody for attending. We're adjourning.